talking about that, there's a lot of reading to do. Obviously, I will be sending through the webinar, the recording, and I'll send through the webinar, the recording, and the handout. So you have that as a reference. But the biggest thing to recognize, your first big A is APRA. APRA is Australian Healthcare Practitioner Regulation Agency. So I call it the big daddy of all healthcare professionals. So APRA is up here. It's the horizon. It's the sky. Within APRA, you have podiatry board, you have physiotherapy board, occupational osteopath, everyone is in there, right? So what's happening is APRA is the big regulation body. It sets out your code of conduct. It sets out your policies. So when you hear people talk about limited registration, general registration, you are getting that through APRA. So if you think about hierarchy of care, APRA goes up top. APRA, like I said, is the big daddy, is the main way that says, check mark, you are generally registered to practice as a physiotherapist. So that's A number one. Then you have the next A, which is APC, Australian Physiotherapy Council. Australian Physiotherapy Council, the role of APC as a private body in Australia is an accreditor. It takes a look at your documents, it takes a look at your transcripts, your degree, everything that you've done, looks at it and says, all right, whether you are qualified to move on to whichever pathway. So we'll talk about the pathways in a couple of seconds, but in a couple of minutes. But the first thing, what you're doing, that's why the step one, if you do go through the APC, and again, that's coming if there's another pathway, if you do go through the APC pathway, you basically have to submit your documentation as step one, which is called the eligibility criteria. Once you cross that eligibility criteria, that's approximately a week in the making. They're very quick. It's a very quick turnaround. You have to do a cultural and safety training just so that it's not hard. It's just a matter of understanding the community that you're working with, understanding the beliefs that you're working with. And I think especially coming off as overseas clinicians, it is very important that we respect the people and the society here. And so then the next part comes in is that's where, depending on the pathway that you will be chosen and APC will guide you accordingly, you go through either the standard assessment, express, or the flyer pathway. So that is APC. Once you're done with the APC pathway, then you get a final certificate. That final certificate basically says, all right, congratulations, you've completed whichever pathway you were on, and now you can go in. So what you will do, you will take that final certificate, put that to APRA with other documentations to go ahead and do your general registration. Obviously, there are exceptions to it. We'll have a chat about that as well. The next A is APA, which is Australian Physiotherapy Association. So this is a professional body, basically, that this represents us. So we need advocates as well. So APA is our advocating body. It helps us with networking. It helps us with latest research. So for instance, I'll give you the biggest example, right? So NDIS, if anyone is here in Australia, NDIS, the cost of physiotherapy for 1 hour session has been $193.99 for the last 3 years. It hasn't changed. Every year there's a change in cost table of costs for NDIS, but physio hasn't changed. So what physios are doing, so AP is comprised of physios. What they're doing, basically, they're sitting there advocating that for the service that we provide, we need more, because an OT session, depending on the complexity of the patient, can range from $250 to $400. So you see the massive gap within the costing. So I'm not saying that everything comes back to money, but again, it's a service. At the end of the day, we all are service providers, and those are things that AP is looking for. The AP is looking for us to be able to practice autonomously, practice and have that less red tape, I would say. So they are looking in for us and our benefits as physios. So that's one of the biggest roles of APA. So remember, I said APRA, then I said APC, then we have APA. Now with APRA, you have two types of registrations. One is limited registration, one is general registration. Everybody, even Australian graduates or people in universities, have to go through this, but especially overseas clinicians. You'll hear your colleagues talk about limited registration, and it confuses everyone. What is it? So number one, you need general registration to be able to practice in Australia as a physiotherapist independently. So today, if Mr. X comes in, they're coming in, let's say we'll pick Kuwait, right? They're coming in from Kuwait, they're in Australia, visa's no issue, they have everything settled, paperwork is great. Now, it's their choice, depending on the pathway that they take for the assessment. They can work as limited registration physio, which is basically a physio under supervision, where they would need an English test, they would need all their documentation, but the biggest thing that they need is a supervisor. When they have a supervisor, that supervisor is going to sit with them, fill out a form, fill out an application, and then go ahead. It's ALRP 66. They will go ahead, fill that application out, come up with a supervisory plan, depending on their level of experience, and then go from there. Now, does everyone need to have limited registration? No, you don't. Now, you have to recognize limited registration is very limited. And the reason why I say that, because it takes a lot for a clinic. I own my own clinic. It takes a lot for a clinic manager to take away resources, because technically now they're taking a physio away from their normal practice to be able to supervise you. So if you think about it, on average, a physio sees about 12 to 15 patients a day in an 8-hour day, right? So now instead of seeing those 12 to 15, now they're seeing 8 to 10, because they're spending time teaching you, supervising you. That is a lot. If you think 8 to 10, so you're losing 4 patients, 4 times 5, that's 20 patients a week. If you think again, everything comes back to money. Healthcare is business, because clinics need to run as well. For them, that is a lot. I'm not saying that you cannot get it. You can. There are a lot of clinicians that do get it. But my biggest recommendation as a mentor would be keep your options open. And don't want everyone to just come in saying, I need to get limited registration. I need to get limited registration. You don't. You can work as a limited. If you can find a supervisor, absolutely go to the limited registration route. But if you can't, then you have the opportunity to be an allied health assistant in a rehab facility. What is an allied health assistant? Allied health assistant, as the name suggests, is an assistant that helps throughout. So you can help with transporting, you can help with exercises, and it's great because you're still within the system. So I'll give you an example. I just finished because they're done with the pathway with a clinician that came actually from the States. And they were in their clinical pathway and they just had 2 more clinicals left, the cardio and the neuro. And they asked me, they're like, I have 3 more months. I know I'm going to pass it. I'm working with you, so I'm confident everything's going to be great. Should I go in for limited registration? And I said, in all honesty, from my end, by the time you put in your paperwork, 6 weeks, 8 weeks of that paperwork, it'll be time. You'll get general registration. So 1, save that cost. 2, just go ahead, get through the exams, focus on that, and then apply for general registration. But in the meantime, I did push them. We talked through different opportunities, and they were able to get a position as an AHA in one of the rehab hospitals in Adelaide. So again, the key comes in, there's no one size fits all. There are opportunities there. It's how you take on to them. The biggest thing is please, and we can talk this, that's not part of this basically presentation, but let's stop bombarding companies. Are you hiring a limited registration physio? You can see what's going to happen. Eventually, companies are going to get very irritated and something's going to happen. So my biggest recommendation would be have a good resume, have a good cover letter where it's strong enough to say, hi, this is who I am. I'm an overseas physio. I'm currently within the APC pathway, looking on for opportunities as a limited registration physio, instead of just blankly emailing, are you hiring a limited registration physio? So that is limited registration. If you don't want to think about that, that's fine. Let's put it to the side. Then comes in general registration. So general registration, remember, whichever pathway you go to, this is your final countdown. This is what you're looking for, general registered physio. For that, number 1, you don't need any supervision. You can work as independent practice. You do need an English test, and the English requirements are very well presented on the APRA's website. If you need the handouts, let me know. I can send that through. Every year, 30th of November, that's when our renewal is, and assuming all CPD hours and requirements, so basic requirements are at least 450 hours of practice. CPD hours are met. CPD stands for professional development. So either online, face-to-face, some sort, even if you're participating in research reviews at your clinic, that gets accounted into it. So the big thing that now the point needs to happen for limited registration, you have APC standard assessment as the pathway you need to take. This again includes express and flyer as well. Pathways for general registration can be the APC standard assessment or the HCPC in the New Zealand and Australian pathway. All right. Now, let's talk about the burning question, different pathways into registration. So with the APC, Australian Physiotherapy Council, you have first the express flyer and the flyer pathway. They came about this in the last couple of years because what they did, they wanted to look at different countries that have similar healthcare systems, number one, similar educational qualifications, right? So if you really think about it, countries even like United States are not on here. Why? Because the healthcare system is drastically different. And, from a trained physio in the US with a doctorate, that really hit hard because that system is different. I get that, but education-wise, you do match up to it. Anyway, so with the flyer countries, express flyer countries, you have Canada, UK, makes sense because Commonwealth countries, Ireland and Hong Kong. So here, what you need to do if you are a candidate going through this pathway, you will just need to do the eligibility assessment, which is taking your documents, giving it to the APC. They will look at everything, say check, 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 pay the fee for culture safety training, and then you go through it. You do not need any written or clinical. As soon as the culture safety is done, you can go ahead and apply. You will get a final certificate. You are good to go. You're through the door. Apply for general registration. Then you have your flyer pathway. Flyer countries are South Africa, Netherlands. Recently, Sweden was added and Singapore. So for here, candidates will need to finish the eligibility assessment, culture and safety training, and just the written assessment. So they're exempt from doing clinical assessments. Documents that you need: completed an entry-level physiotherapy qualification in undergrad or bachelor's, held registration with no restrictions with relevant regulatory body in that country for the last 5 years, ability to practice without any restrictions, and entry-level qualification that is either diploma level or higher. Now here, I'll come back to this in a quick second once we talk about the HCPC pathway, because we get this question a lot that, hey, I have my UK registration via the HCPC pathway. Can I apply for Express Flyer? No, you cannot. Your education needs to be from those countries. Right. So today, when I was back in the States, I could very easily apply for Express Flyer. I could very easily get UK's registration, but still it wouldn't count. Your education needs to be from that country in order to satisfy the requirements. So you could be sitting in India and then get the HCPC, still does not count to go to Express Flyer. So please be careful of that. Next comes in the standard assessment pathway. So this is where the shakedown happened this week, where everybody that was going through the HCPC pathway came about to say, all right, now you're going to have to go through this pathway. This does entail exams, eligibility assessment. Everybody, regardless, has to do that. Culture and safety training, you have to do that. Once you do your eligibility assessment, culture and safety training, you get something called an interim certificate. This certificate is valid for 2 years. Not that they're not going to renew it, but they want to know your circumstances of renewing it. So understand that 2 years is enough to take the written and the clinical assessment, but for whatever reason, family, professionally, travel, etc., 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 your reasons, you need to kind of provide that to them for them to say, all right, I need to renew it. Why? So back in the day, I would say even pre-2017, what was happening, people would go through step one. At that time, there was no culture and safety training. People would go through step one. They would do the eligibility assessment, hold on to that interim certificate for years and years on end. They would work, settle down in Australia, work. And suddenly, interim certificate's about to expire. And they're like, hey, can you renew it? APC would renew it. Now recognize that's a lot of paperwork on someone, right? Because they have to look through all your documentation again and make sure, yes, that you're eligible for that renewal. And then people would still continue working, but not go to the pathway and then ask for another renewal. So now what they said, stop this. This is too much paperwork on our end. So what they're saying, yes, we will renew it. But guess what? If my renewal was on, let's say, March 2025, they will not entertain renewal till February 2025, so about 30 days before that. So I need to provide them a reason why and where I am in the process, be it, oh, I'm planning to take the written exam in June, or I'm trying to take the clinicals in March, whatever the reason might be, you need to provide them a reason. Because if you don't have a legitimate reason and they've already had a renewal and you're asking for another renewal, they will literally not renew it till you book an exam. So that has happened with clinicians. So be mindful where you are, because again, it comes back to extra paperwork on their end, and it's labor, right? It's labor intensive looking at paperwork. So with the exams, you have one written assessment. The written assessment's offered March, June, September, and December. It's always the first Thursday of the month. Last year, they changed the policy. Now, earlier, what used to happen till 2023, July 2023, your exams, your deadline to book the exam was 3 months before. So that honestly really, really, pardon my language, sucked for clinicians that had an unfortunate, unsuccessful attempt, let's say in the June exam, and now they had to wait all the way to December to book their exam. So what now they've done, so if your exam is in June, you've done that, let's say you had an unsuccessful attempt, you can still sit for the September because the deadline is, let's say, July 22nd. With that comes another policy change. Till September of this year, the APC had a cancellation with refund policy as long as you were within that deadline of 6 weeks till the exam. But now, as of September, they've changed it to the point that there's a no refund cancellation. So let's say today, I decide I want to take the March exam. I'm not ready yet. I'm now working with Van to be like, all right, let's go study. And Van's like, I personally think you need a little bit more time because it's better to take the exam in one go than wait till the end and come through it. And what happens that I get no money back because they said we can cancel it, but you've already paid for it and we cannot undo that. So it's very important from a mentor standpoint that it's better to wait till the deadline to book the exam than preemptively book it. Once you're done with the written assessment, you can start to apply for the clinical exam. Clinical exam is in 3 fields: ortho, cardio, and neuro. You have to take it. There's no exception to that. Right now, everything is in person in Melbourne. Who knows, like in the future, very similar to the AMC, Australian Medical Board, they might change it to an online version, but I suspect not, because our profession is very hands-on and it is important to work on transfers. It's unless it was another COVID hit, and if it hopefully that doesn't happen, I don't see it turn towards that. So ideally, the time for each one is about 4 to 6 months, 3 to 4 months, depending on your level of expertise and your knowledge base. So this is variable depending on where you're at. So these are some resources to think of. Please, please, please take your time, look through the information booklets. And one thing about the written assessment, which is important to recognize, your written assessment can be taken on site in Melbourne and Sydney, but remotely. So they have 2 remote times available for Perth Standard Time and London time zone. So basically, if you're sitting, let's say, in Amsterdam, absolutely, you can go. Amsterdam is Netherlands, so that won't count. Let's say you're sitting in Ethiopia, you can absolutely take the exam remotely. So that opens up the possibilities for overseas physios to go ahead and take the exam accordingly. When in doubt, please come through, ask questions as needed. Always here to answer them. Now, woohoo! All right, let's talk about this pathway. So for starters, I have nothing against this pathway. Yes, part of me is very sad because why wasn't it there when I was going ahead? Why wasn't this loophole discovered? So from the start, when this pathway was discovered, I call it the loophole pathway. Why do I call it the loophole? You're kind of backtracking back doors to get through. You're avoiding APC, which is great, but guess what? APC is a private body. They're going to catch you somehow. But anyway, this pathway was discovered by some very amazing physios and clinicians, and they were like, well, this little loophole exists, let's milk it. I'm all for milking it as long as everything goes smoothly. So basically what this entails, that wherever you're sitting in the world, and if you do choose this pathway, you have to, HCPC is basically with HCPC, you would have to get your UK registration. Once the UK leg is done, then you apply for New Zealand. Once the New Zealand leg is done, then you go ahead through the TTMR, which is Trans-Tasman Pathway. You apply for APRA registration. So what you're doing with that 8CPC pathway, APC is here, you're absolutely going ahead and knocking that off. You're not going through and through APC pathway. So remember, Express, Flyer, Standard Assessment, you have to go through the APC. 8CPC, you don't have to. Approximate time frame at the moment is about 6 to 9 months. The application is relatively heavy, I would say earlier in the year. And that is something that I was telling clinicians that if you can get through right away, like apply now, because within the next couple of months, APC was already making trips, like the director of APC was making trips to New Zealand, trying to talk through what should be done. And now 10 months later, that result is in front of us this week in terms of what happened. People are still applying, but again, it depends on the visa status, what your visa is, how that's going to come about, what options you have. Obviously, Mr. Hussein's going to discuss those with us. You can still apply. I know the big shakedown happened this week in terms of people thinking the pathway is closed. The pathway is not closed. It's still there because it exists for other medical professions, healthcare professions. It's just a matter of APC saying, we're going to close off the ability for people that were going through HCPC pathway, not through us, to get that skilled migration assessment. So again, we'll be talking about that further. So those are the big pathways into it. So now recognize, as an overseas physio, either onshore or offshore, you can apply through the HCPC pathway, get your general registration. Or you, as an overseas onshore or offshore, apply through the APC standard assessment, Flyer or Express, and get your general registration. The biggest things to consider: are you eligible for either? What is your visa status? Do you need more experience? Now, what do I mean by that? Now, it's important to recognize, right? Yes, all of us want to be able to work, but you have to sit back and think, do I have enough experience to be able to practice in the country? Because at the end of the day, I am going to say something that might strike a chord with some of you. I am very passionate as a physio, right? And the care that we provide to the patients is definitely very important. I had to go through the rigmarole of getting my registration done, even though I have a doctorate. I'm an academic. I used to teach back at my university. So I had to go through all of that to be able to prove. And even when I did get my general certificate, of my final certificate, it completely bypassed me being a doctorate and said, oh, we've assessed you at the level of an undergrad. Trust me, guys, I cried. I cried because I put 7 good, hardworking years into getting my doctorate. And to the point that it was knocked down to undergrad, it hurt. But now I have my own clinic. I do what I do. My patients love me, and I'm doing what I love to do. So you have to make up that mind. I have met different kind of clinicians in the last couple of years as a mentor with APP, where they say that I don't want to go through the HCPC pathway because I want to improve my skills. I want to be a better physio than I was for the public that I work with. That obviously opens more opportunities for you. Or you might say, nah, I don't care. I just want to get the paperwork done. I want my certificate. So you have to choose what works the best for you mentally and professionally, where you want to go. Obviously, that big, now with the changes that came about this week, the big visa is your decision making as well. So obviously, if your visa is not at stake, you have all working rights, all living rights in Australia, might as well go to the HCPC pathway while it exists. But again, when in doubt, please come talk to me and we can have a chat about that. So let's go ahead and do a quick review into the standard assessment in particular. With the written and the clinical, are they designed to fail you? I would say absolutely not. They are designed to challenge you. They're designed to challenge your knowledge. They're designed to challenge your education, your clinical skills, because at the end of the day, you are representing the profession into the public. And they want to know, because APC is safeguarding the profession here for physios around Australia and saying, yes, MARN is eligible. MARN is a good physio. MARN checks off all the boxes to be able to be a good physio to the public, because it's safety, right, at the end of the day. So that is an important consideration to think about. Are the assessments designed to assess your textbook knowledge? I would say absolutely not. I've been a mentor for 7 years. I've gone through the process, and I can safely say I read textbooks from a standpoint, because at that time I did not have help. I read textbooks as a way to enhance my knowledge because that's all I had. But my biggest change was my mindset towards the exam. Number two, my clinical thinking. I really worked on the why. Being in practice, sometimes we forget the foundational knowledge because we get so used to having our shortcuts to getting things done. But what helped me was getting back to the basics and working in terms of thoroughness towards each thing, being able to verbalize each thing, being able to. My husband is not a physio at all. He's actually an accountant, very boring accountant, yay for accountants. And me being able to explain what I'm doing, that was my biggest thing because that's where I thought my win was, and that's helped me. You need to review every textbook mentioned in the written and the clinical assessment booklet. Is it essential? Not, no, it depends on your clinical skills again. You do need to review 6 hours every day in order to feel accomplished. First of all, that's the biggest myth. Back in the day, back in universities, when we didn't have to care about working, bills, laundry, cooking, cleaning, yes, that would work. You could study for 6 hours. But let's be honest, guys, we're adults now. We have a life, we might have kids, you might have to work, you have a family to support, you have all these things, and you're not able to do that. So even from a mentor perspective, the biggest thing that I say, even if you can give 1 or 2 good solid hours, solid means you're not on TikTok, not on Instagram, not scrolling, not on Facebook Reels, give solid review, focused review, where you're not just sitting there cram, you're good to go. The biggest thing, if I can summarize both the written and the clinical assessment, written, you cannot cram. There's only so much you can cram because brain starts to hurt with that much cramming, because then it becomes a take it in and vomit it out. Those were university exams that we just studied for the sake of studying to be able to pass and get a good grade. That's not it. This is not a university exam. There's a lot of uncertainty around what is assessed because everything in the realm of physio can be asked. It's a matter of your foundational knowledge, your assessment skills, and your common sense in terms of your patient management. And that is what's being assessed here. All right. All right, quick one into the written assessment. There are 2 parts to the exam. They're 2 hours each, 15 case studies, 4 questions each. So it's total 60 questions per exam. The cases are a mixture of cardiorespiratory, ortho, and neurological physiotherapy, along with system interactions. Basically, what that means, you could have a patient with a cardiac condition is coming in and now they're presenting with right shoulder pain. So you've ruled out red flags and now you're looking at it as a shoulder impingement and helping them out accordingly. The level of difficulty, honestly, I would say varies. Sometimes exams can be very mentally challenging, other times not as much. There is no one certain pattern. It honestly depends. They have like a literal toolbox or treasure chest of questions, and they pick and choose from that. And that's what I've seen in the last 7 years. It is scale scoring. Basically, what that means, your minimum score you need to do to pass is 500. That means you have to get at least a 500 on each of those. The total 2 exams, they're total of 1,000. What scale scoring is, that every question has a different weightage to it. So if today me and let's pick on people that are writing. So the people in front of me is Sunil, we have John, and we have Shelley here. And if we're the assessors that are writing the exam, we get to choose the questions that we've done, 3, 5, 7 points. So when you're sitting the exam, you really don't have the time or the mental capacity to sit there and read and calculate what you're going to get. Recommended prep time is 4 to 6 months. As part of Australian Physio Prep, I am the program director and I've worked tirelessly to design an individualized boot camp. Yes, the recommended topic list is the same throughout, but the way we approach is very different. So if today Adarsh or Amrita needed they have their own strengths and weaknesses, our entire program is designed around you. So there's no one size fits all cookie cut. And the beauty is in the mentorship and the guidance that you receive. And the guidance is not just here, this is what you need to study, cram this. It's what part you need to study, how you need to study. So at this point, if you ask me, because we got this question a lot in terms of the pass, with the September exam, our passing rate was 98.7%. I'm very proud of that. Through all the mentors, we have about 10 mentors within the organization, and they are Australian practicing clinicians. And yes, and so we're very happy with obviously the results, but even the ones that did not make it, we're continuing to work with them. So if you want to have a chat, definitely we can chat about it on the side. So moving on with the clinical assessment, clinical assessments are assessed in 3 exams in the core areas of, again, ortho, cardio, and neuro. You have approximately 1.5 hours for each exam. So that's broken down into a handover, a patient session, and a viva. So what does a handover mean? You're going to have some time to read your case, about 10 minutes, then you have 5 minutes to present the case, 50 minutes with the patient where you do your subjective, objective, your entire case study, and then about 10 minutes or 20 minutes for the viva. Relatively quick turnaround, 2 to 3 days. Written assessment is a slower turnaround, 4 to 6 weeks. The December ones are the luckiest. They get their exam results by Christmas time. Usually that has been the case because APC wants to close up for Christmas, so they give the results relatively quick. Again, it's according to a rubric. You get yes or no. There are about 15 points that they're assessing you. They're looking at your thoroughness. They're looking at your patient management, how you conduct yourself. Plus, it shows your overall expertise and your understanding of the profession. I, again, recommend 4 to 6 months. So you're looking at a 1-year commitment when it comes to the written and the clinical assessment. Both our programs are exclusively remotely designed. It is helping clinicians that are currently overseas or in Australia, in different parts of Australia as well. If you're able to come down, do hands-on assessment in Brisbane, because we do have access to my clinic here, then most welcome. So with the clinical assessment, obviously you have that remote aspect plus also the hands-on part to it. Now, in regards, the biggest question that does come through is as an offshore physio, that means an overseas physio that is not in Australia, how can we take? So written assessment, you can absolutely take through your remote exam. Clinicals, you have to physically come to Australia to be able to give the clinical assessment. Here I'm going to do a little bit of a shake. What I have noticed in this year, at least, clinicians that were overseas, if they would show that they're coming to Australia just to give the clinical exam, mostly get their visa denied. And I'm not making a blanket statement. That has come to me from clinicians that has happened because they get a letter saying what was a denial because they showed that you're just coming here for the exam, plans to stay here and not go back to your country. And you have to recognize if you're applying for a visa, they want to know, are you planning to go back or stay here? So what some of the things, and maybe Mr. Hussain can touch on this, maybe because this question comes through, is to somehow show that you're not coming here for the clinical exam. You're coming here to travel, come on tourist, and then go back and then plan what you're going to do. But again, all of this, anything migration visa related is not my level of expertise. I'm just saying what clinicians come back and tell me. Obviously, always recommend talking to somebody who is within that profession and that realm. So again, biggest things to recommend in terms of preparation, mindset shift. So I recommend that mindset to not be like, oh my God, it's hard. I have to get it done like a chore. Rather enjoy it. This is your time to improve your weaknesses and enhance your strengths and become a better clinician than you already are. And I'm telling you, it goes fast. Yes, it's mentally harassing. It's a lot of challenge, but you start to enjoy it. You notice changes. So today, when I'm working with clinicians, when they come back that, oh, thank you to the process, thanks to you, thanks to your mentoring, I got a senior lecturer position in XYZ university. That makes me happy. Like, going from, oh, I don't know, am I going to be driving a truck in the mines to be able to, yes, I can finally work as a physio. That makes you happy. That makes you that, yes, you've been able to achieve that. And recognize that, all of us pretty much, I can speak for myself at least, moving to Australia was not easy. Like one, you have to start fresh in a brand new country, find your spot, find your niche, but you can do this. Like if I can, you definitely can do this. I never thought I would have my own business. I never thought I would not be working under someone because that was the culture back home. But I have my own business, I have my own clinic, and I love it. And now, 7 years in, I don't think I could work under anyone ever. Maybe I'm too spoiled to work under myself, work for myself, but that's kind of the thing. And so recognize opportunities are endless as long as you work towards them. Work is needed. I work 80-hour weeks. Do I love it? Absolutely. Am I exhausted? Absolutely. But again, this is the time to make it happen for yourself. I want to say that there is light at the end of the tunnel. It does require patience and perseverance and the right guidance. And, there is a lot of information out there. So it's important to recognize who you're connecting with, what information. And even from colleague to colleague, recognize that everybody has their story. I get a lot of clinicians that come back and tell me that, oh my God, Vaughn, this person said the exam was challenging. What do I do? Everybody has their story. Today, I'm telling you, it wasn't that challenging. It was time consuming, but wasn't that challenging. So everybody has their story. This is your time to make your story. These are some recommended textbooks. Obviously, this includes the APC books that they recommend as well. You have Physical Rehabilitation by Susan Sullivan. This is like Bible to me when it comes to neuro rehab. Then you have Karen Shepard. Main and Dennehy textbook is great. David McGee, Kistner, Bruckner and Kahn, and Don Newman are some very important textbooks. Best thing to consider is time management. Have your work, career, business, but think about family, think about your mental health and balance it out. And that's where that time comes in. If you need to rush because of visa purposes, have a chat with me. I will help you design your program accordingly. But if you have the time, definitely give yourself the time. Work on your strengths and weaknesses. This is your time to improve yourself and become a stronger version than you already are. All right. I've already kind of expressed this, what we are. Obviously, for us with the written and the clinical assessment, the goal is passing in the first attempt. There's no guarantee. Never work with me if I guarantee that you're going to pass, please. Just because you're the one who's taking the exam, but I can guarantee one thing, you will find yourself become a better version of a physio than you are. With the written assessment, it's a one-stop shop. Every single thing that you need from an exam standpoint is provided to you based on your own needs in terms of your strengths and weaknesses. Yes, again, I've said the topic recommendations are pretty much the same, but the way that they're presented differs from clinician to clinician. With the clinical exam prep, again, mentoring is remote via Zoom. We have weekly webinars with patient mocks, lots and lots of feedback to strengthen your clinical knowledge. I worked with about 6 clinicians on last Friday and Tuesday, and they had their clinical assessments and all of them passed. I'm very, very grateful for that. And one of them, in their thank you recording basically said that I even I don't know, like Mealy or like any support person is not 24/7, but you guys are. So how do you do that? And I was like, I have no idea. It's just there. Someone's always there to help support you and guide you. And we're very proud of that. I'm very grateful to be a part of everyone's journey. So yeah, any questions? I know I kind of cruised through it. There's a lot. I could literally spend 2 hours talking about everything, but just being mindful of Mr. Hussein's time and everyone's time. But anything related to the exam, please, please, please come have a discussion, or you just want to chit chat about where you are, what you need to do, always and always here. But if there are no questions, that means I've either done a very horrible job or a very good job. But either way, shoot some questions through and I will work through them. Yeah, go ahead. What's your question, please? You can unmute yourself here, and if you want to ask.
Hello, I want to know more about APC and APA.
APC and APA. So APC, Australian Physiotherapy Council, is the main accreditation body. It's a private body that takes in all your documents and says whether you're eligible to sit through the standard assessment, express or flyer pathway. APA is basically your Australian Physiotherapy Association. It is also a private body. It's made up of physios overseas, physios working in Australia that forms kind of a safety net for us as physios, right? Every profession has a safety net behind them that says that advocates for them, that pushes for the profession. So that's the role of APA. So let's see.
So can the offshore person apply for APA?
Yeah, so basically what happens if you go through the APC process, so APA, again, like I said, it's not a regulatory body, it's just your safety net. As a profession, it is recommended, I'm a physiotherapist today, it is recommended that I'm a member of my own organization. So I'm a member of APA. So if someone's an accountant, they will be part of the Australian Accountants Association, AAA. Let's say that's the name. I'm just making it up, but that's sort of the way that it goes. Or let's say a chiropractor would be part of Australian Chiropractor, ACA, Chiropractic Association. So it is sort of a respect factor and kind of giving in. The good thing about APA, they have lots and lots of professional development because all clinicians come together and educate and work on that. I've got multiples in regards to, can we prepare for the March assessment if we start now? Absolutely. A good 3.5 solid months. Come talk to me. I will tell you our boot camp is especially designed for this period to help you get that through. How much time is required to prepare for clinicals? On average, I would say at least anywhere between 3 to 6 months, but it varies from patient to patient, not patient, clinician to clinician. Can I take the written assessment in the Philippines online? Is this possible? Absolutely. It is remote exam, so you can. As I'm in India right now, but I have a permanent resident visa, how can I go ahead with the limited registration when I'll be moving to Australia by February, March? That's great. You're in the safe zone. All you have to do for limited registration is find a supervisor, find someone to work with. So when you are applying, basically you go ahead and say, are you hiring any limited registration physios? But if you're planning to come in February and March, I would recommend Sanjeet start to think about even working as an AHA, probably just to get some experience, just to be within the system. Guys, what I'm thinking at this point, we will move on to Mr. Hussein's part. Keep giving me your questions. I'll collate them and then go ahead and answer that. All right. So, all right, on to you.
Thank you so much, man. It was quite an informative session. I think I picked up a lot of things today, learning about what goes on in the background, and I think it really helps my clients as well, knowing all of this process that happens before we jump in. So for those of you who have just joined now, my name is Hussein, and I'm the director of migration Pathfinders. I've been in the industry for the 10 years. I got my license in 2019 after passing the impossible migration exam, capstone exam. And I've been practicing in employer sponsorship for the last 10 years, and also practicing general skill migration family visas for the last 5 years as well. And I've started my own practice last year. All right, so the purpose of this presentation was, obviously there's a lot happening in terms of skills assessment changes, and there's some background changes on employer-sponsored program as well. So I just wanted to talk about both of these and how the next 1 year or near future is looking like as a physiotherapist in this very fluid space. Next slide, please. So just a disclaimer that obviously the information prepared for this session is clearly worked out, but it does not constitute to legal migration advice. So if you need any individual advice, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll have to undertake a formal assessment of suitability according to your circumstances, so we can advise you in that manner. All right, just a bit of about agenda in terms of what to expect. So what I wanted to do before jumping into the skill assessment and registration requirements in terms of how they impact the visa options, I wanted to talk about, on a very high level, general skill migration and employer sponsored visas, what types of options there are, and what option does, what is involved in each of these options, and what's changing in the employer-sponsored visa space, and the APC skill assessment requirements that have been just released this week, and how does it impact in terms of your visa options, and what's the way forward, and how we can help you. And then at the end, we'll take some questions. Next slide. So starting off with general skill migration. So general skill migration has been around for quite some time. It is a points-based system where you get points on the basis of your age, your qualification, your experience, other things like if you've studied in Australia, and there is a range of other factors. I'm not going to go in detail because that's not the focus of this session, but I just wanted to still talk about what options there are and how they are different from each other. So the most popular option amongst the GSM visas is the independent skilled subclass 189, which obviously requires the occupation to be on the medium to long-term lists, and you get your points on the basics, qualification, age, etc. The second option is the state nomination subclass 190. It's also a type of permanent residence visa. However, it also involves you to meet additional eligibility requirements, which involve the state occupation list at times. If you're offshore, then requirements for an offshore applicant. If you're onshore, then requirements for an onshore applicant in terms of contract, being located in that particular state. Every state has different requirements. One thing to note is that for all GSM visas, apart from the 191, the age cap is 45. So if you are over 45, then general skill migration is not an option. You may need to explore other options like employer-sponsored visas. And then we have the provisional pathway, which is the skilled work regional subclass 491. 190 gives you an additional 5 points for state nomination, which is obviously an added benefit as to why people go for a 190 as against a 1989. Plus, the other difference for the 190 is that it also allows people from the short-term occupation list, apart from the medium to long-term list. Although physiotherapist is clearly on the long-term list. So, but just for your knowledge, if you had any accompanying family where they are on the short-term list, then obviously you can perhaps, if you want to claim their points, then you can perhaps apply for a 190 rather than a 189. If, for example, they're a marketing specialist or some other occupation in the short term. And then the 491, it's the provisional visa. It's not permanent residence. It comes with some benefits from what I get to know from clients. Obviously, it's not my area of expertise. It's the Department of Human Services responsibility to confirm whether you're eligible or not. But what I've been told by my clients and what information is available online is that you get Medicare on the 491, and most states are now open to school education for your children in terms of public schools. The benefit of why one should apply for a 491 when it's not a permanent residence and you essentially pay the same fee as you would pay for a 189 or 190 is that it gives you additional 15 points, and sometimes it's a good entry point to get in Australia. Obviously, it requires you to reside and work in a designated regional area, which pretty much all of Australia is except Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. And New South Wales, Van, you can correct me, but what I've looked at jobs and skill data is that New South Wales is not a good option anymore anyway, because there's not much demand in New South Wales, but you can still explore options in other states. And as long as your role is based outside designated region and you live outside designated region, then you can go for the 491 for the additional 15 points. There's also a family stream path for the 491, but the department that falls under the federal government umbrella rather than the state nomination. But the department so far for this year, they haven't included any family sponsored 491. So it's not a very good option right now. With 491, obviously, you also need to meet the state nomination criteria, just like 190. And most states have their own criteria, their own occupation list. Sometimes they don't have an occupation list, but most of the states have. And it varies from time of the year. So it really depends on where you're looking for and what's the demand there. States have that, what do you call, the option of not to disclose any information as to who they're inviting. They do not have to follow the ranking system. They have their own ranking system and they don't have to disclose any data. For 189, you still get the data of how many people are invited on what points, but 491 is not one of those where they have to. It's more, I call it cherry picking. That they generally do in terms of states, and it varies. You will find information online from different sources, other agents sharing information. Sometimes state bodies do voluntarily do that. So you can do your own research. It's essentially the demand-driven market. So if a state has a demand, then obviously they'll make invites. So do your research on the industry as well. That's really helpful. And then obviously there's the 191 pathway, which is a permanent residence, has a very low fee. It's for those who are on the 491 visa and the 494, which I'll talk about as an employer-sponsored option. After you have lived and worked in a regional area for 3 years, you become eligible for this one. It takes about 12 months as well. And you have to continue to comply with the conditions of the 491 of living and working in regional area until your 191 is granted. All right. In terms of, so this is just a very high level overview of what a process for GSM involves. Obviously, the first step is to obtain the skill assessment and the registration as it's applicable. And once we have a positive skill assessment and essentially the English requirement, which obviously is a prerequisite anyway for physiotherapist, then we move on to, I'll answer your question, Amrita, once I get to the 482. Lodge an expression of interest. And that's where you get in the pool. And with the federal government, they're running it every month. States are also running invitation rounds almost every month, the ones that are open for overseas and also for the onshore ones. And if you're invited, then you lodge the visa application. The state sponsorship happens somewhere in the middle. Sometimes with EOI, you have to submit a registration of interest, ROI, especially for Victoria, and some other states also require for onshore applicants. Or you do have to do that at the time of state inviting you first, where you have 14 days of deadline, and then you have to submit the visa application within 60 days. And the EOI is valid for a period of 2 years. It does help. The longer you have held your expression of interest, that kind of helps when the department is processing under the 189 program. They kind of look at the date order and the points and everything. So it does help if you have been in the pool as early as you can. Once you have the skill assessment meet all the time of invitation requirements, that's where you should submit an expression of interest. And the minimum points for GSM is 65. There's a lot that I haven't touched upon, but just being mindful of the time. I can talk about GSM for 1 hour, but there's just not enough time to go through it. I'm sure you guys would have also done research when exploring your options in Australia. And then comes the employer-sponsored visa, which is my favorite, because obviously that's what I've done for the greater part of my career. So the most popular option in the employer-sponsored visas is subclass 482, which is what we currently call the temporary skills shortage TSS visa. It's a visa which you can apply for 1 to 4 years to come to Australia and work for your nominated employer with pathway to PRs, which I'll talk about shortly after. And the occupation can be either on the short-term list, medium to long-term list, and labor agreement. Currently, it's going to change. Obviously, I'll talk about that as well. The current requirement for a 482 is to have 2 years of relevant full-time equivalent experience post-qualification. The department is very strict when it comes to post-qualification, so ensure that it's not your qualification was considered to be completed after your result is released by the university. As usually transcripts do list out the date that the result is released. So just be mindful of that. In terms of how many hours are enough for an employer-sponsored visa, unlike general skill migration where lesser hours are generally fine as well, employer-sponsored visas requires you to have work full-time. Recently, the department has changed their stance for it slightly, and now they're a bit more flexible as long as you can, even if it's a casual role, as long as you have work for 35 hours or more over the period of 2 years, then it's likely to be considered meeting the requirement for experience. I'll talk about how this is changing slightly when it comes to the upcoming changes. And then obviously we have the popular subclass 186 employer nomination scheme. I'll talk about the skill assessment registration requirements specific for physiotherapists, but at this stage I'm just going through overall requirements. So there's 2 streams. It's a permanent residence visa, essentially, where you obviously need employer sponsorship. So for all employer sponsor visa, there's 2 applications. One is the nomination and the other is the visa. And obviously the business also needs to have a sponsorship, which is valid for 5 years, or a labor agreement for certain occupations. 186 does not require sponsorship, but it does require nomination and visa. So the business submits application on your behalf, and which includes their financials, their details of the position, how the salary meets the market rates, and all other requirements, including organization chart, etc., where applicable. There are two streams. So one is the direct entry stream, where the occupation needs to be on the long-term list. And the other main requirement is that you need to have a skills assessment in 3 years of relevant full-time experience. The direct entry stream, I get a lot. People ask me whether we can apply for a direct entry stream whilst we are overseas. I do not recommend that. The reason why I do that is because there is a requirement in the nomination for direct entry for the position to be genuine. And if you don't have any relationship with the employer, like you haven't worked with the employer yet, then it's very likely going to be questioned as, are they doing a favor to you by offering you permanent residence? Because most employers are generally not open to doing a direct entry while the applicant is still overseas. So because the reason for that is that once you get permanent residence, you're not bound to work with that employer. So you can perhaps pretty much go anywhere else, like not in the physiotherapy profession, but over the 10 years, I've seen it many times, people getting permanent residence and next day they hand in their resignation. And employer is just left, can I do anything? And our answer is no, they're permanent resident now. So which is why a lot of employers don't go for it. So if they are offering you a temporary skills shortage, TF482 visa, do consider it, because obviously they have their own reservations. Think of it from their end. They're investing a lot of time and money in sponsoring you. And why would they do that if they don't have that trust relationship developed with you already? And then there's the temporary residence transition stream, where you need to have worked with a nominated employer on a 457, which used to be the previous name, subclass, or a 482 visa in Australia for the same employer. So if for any period that you have not been in Australia, like a long leave, like short leaves are fine, but if you have been absent for a considerable period of time, then I would not include that time. And any time that you have taken unpaid leave. So excluding those, as long as you have worked for the 2 years, doesn't matter which occupation it is, as long as you hold a 482, worked for the employer on that 482, then you are generally eligible. I'll talk about some of the general requirements next slide. And then there's the 494 option. Not a very, I think a suitable option, maybe not for physiotherapists, but for a lot of other occupations. The primary reason is that it gives the freedom of applying under the long-term list, short-term list, or the regional occupation list. And it's essentially a regional provisional visa, just like a 491. But the only difference is that you can only work for the nominated employer whilst holding the 494 visa. It has a pathway to permanent residence after 3 years. The requirements for this is very similar to direct entry 186, which is that you need to have held a positive valid skills assessment in 3 years of relevant full-time experience in order to be eligible for 494. And the role obviously needs to be based in a designated regional area outside Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. And then there's some common criteria in terms of for all the employer sponsor visas, and less so for 186, but more so for other options. There's a labor market testing required where the employer has to has to advertise the role on 2 platforms for at least 28 days. And then only they can submit the nomination, and subsequently you can submit the visa application. Obviously, employer generally looks after that part as well most of the times. There's a salary requirement, which is tied to temporary skills income threshold, which is currently 73,100. It used to be 53,400, but it has increased. So that's one of the challenges as well in terms of, I don't know what do you call a graduate physiotherapist gets, when maybe you can let us know, but it has to be above this 73,150. And also, obviously, the employer has to justify the market rates, like as to before offering you the salary, have they considered what's the standard in the market? And obviously, that's for protection of the applicants, that they're not getting exploited as against in terms of getting the employer sponsored visas. And this also obviously requires some other English, meeting English, health and character requirements. English is different. Generally for 482 is slightly lower, and for 186 and 494, they're slightly higher. Competent English requirements for main applicants. In terms of process for employer sponsorship, as I said, that if there is any skill assessment required, and then obviously you do that in front. That's only not for 482, but more so for 494 and 186 direct entry. Those are the ones which require a skill assessment. I'll talk about physiotherapists and skill assessment registration requirements on shortly after. But this is a prerequisite for employer-sponsored permanent residence and 494 visa. Obviously, business, as I said, that business needs to hold the sponsorship, which is generally valid for 5 years. And then obviously they submit a nomination application and you lodge a visa application. Only once the sponsorship is approved, the nomination can be finalized. Once the nomination is approved, the visa can be finalized. If obviously they hold the sponsorship already, then all they have to do is a nomination and visa, and they both need to be approved in order for you to relocate to Australia. If you're overseas or if you're in Australia, then you can start working for them. Generally, there are deadlines in terms of how long do you have before you can start working. For overseas, you have about 60 days from entry. I think the same goes for onshore applicants as well. All right. Next slide. So what's changing in the employer-sponsored visa space? So the billion-dollar question is, when are these changes coming? I attended the Migration Institute of Australia conference that we have on an annual basis, which is attended by immigration lawyers and migration agents around the country. And we had representatives from the department, including the minister himself, Minister for Immigration, and also his director for looking after employer-sponsored and general skilled migration visas program. And we were not given any clear date of when it's about to happen. There was a lot of speculation around the industry as to whether it's getting over this weekend on the 23rd to 24th. I also thought, because I cheekily asked the director a lot of questions to get an answer, and kind of got an indication that they are working towards releasing it on the 23rd or 24th. But just this morning, we got an MIA, Migration Institute of Australia's notification from the department that they are making progress, but it's nowhere near release. One thing I did ask the director was whether we will get some heads up, like it won't be last minute thing, like the way skill assessment changes happen. And obviously, generally for the department form, it generally give a heads up, like they give you about a month or two. I can't obviously say how much they're going to give. That's only when the legislation comes through, only that's when we will know as to how much time we have. But if you're already in the process or you're about to start, I would say give it a head start. Your employer needs to advertise the role for 28 days. Make sure that you are taking steps to start the process, because obviously once the legislation comes out, then it would be easier to evaluate options, and then you have to go through, and if it's unfavorable, which I doubt that it will be for physiotherapists, because it was on the confident on list, which I've obviously talked about shortly as well in terms of stream. But do give it a head start. All right, a little bit about what's going to happen as to what the director told us in the session that we had with him. I think it's a bit blurry. I don't know why. Okay, now clear. It's going to be up to 4 years of validity, which is pretty much same as for currently TSS program. I think it's more of like a political wrapping of the package. They say, oh, we are changing everything. That's what happens every 3-4 years. So not much has changed, but there are some structure changes which are kind of helpful as well. So it's validity for up to 4 years. So you can apply for 1, 2, 3, 4 years. Obviously, employer has to pay SAF levy for the period of duration that they apply for. And obviously, I generally recommend 3 years to most people, because you become eligible under TRT anyway after 2 years. So 3 years is pretty much a safe option if that's what you can. And there's a pathway, and they have indicated that there's going to be a pathway for everyone. Currently, there was no pathway for short-term occupation list. There were some provisional transition provisions in place, which pretty much allowed everyone to apply for PR, but there's still people in both who can't apply for permanent residence for multiple reasons. But they have said that it's going to have a clear pathway to permanent. We don't know as to what those pathways are going to be, but our understanding is that it's pretty similar to what it is currently, with a few changes. There are 3 streams of this skills on demand visa, which is to come into place sometime before Christmas. That's what they've confirmed. It's going to be before Christmas. It could be 24th of December. Hopefully not. We don't want clients running after me during the holiday period. But it's hopefully going to be next week or the week after. That's what my prediction is. It's going to have 3 streams. So one is going to be the specialist skill stream. Specialist skill stream won't have any occupation list. And it would, but the main requirement for that would be that the base and guaranteed earnings, excluding any super bonus, would be $135,000. And it would include everyone apart from some trade workers, machinery operator, drivers, and laborers. We don't know the specifics of the occupations because the director didn't specify, but we'll obviously know when the time comes closer. Obviously, I don't think any of the health professions would be impacted. They would still be eligible for this stream. There's going to be higher English requirement, which is 6 each in IELTS or 15 PT and other tests as well. So it's pretty much same as registration requirements for EPRA. And then there's the core skills stream, which is going to be the mirror image of the current TSS program. But with the one major change is that it's going to have a consolidated scaled occupation list. There have been a few industry submissions over the last 6 months, and the department did release, Jobs and Skills did release consolidated confident on list, off list, and considered for consultation. Physiotherapists were on the confident on list, so I doubt that physiotherapists would be touched and taken out of the CSO. And but there are certain occupations. It also depends on the demand as well. And on the jobs and skill website, physiotherapist is pretty much in demand, except New South Wales at the moment. So I don't think it's going anywhere. And then there's this essential skill stream, which is replica of the current labor agreement stream for off-list occupations. Probably not relevant to you guys, but just for completeness. The work experience requirement, the budget papers that were released for the current financial year, it had a comment that it will come into place on the 23rd of November. But the department has now clarified that they may not go because it requires a legislative instrument as well, which hasn't been released or passed the parliament. So they have confirmed that it will be part of the skills on demand visa changes. So they probably won't release that ahead of it. I don't know why they included it in the budget papers. Maybe it was a mistake by someone, but it will be part of the skills on demand visa changes. So it will be changed from 2 years to 1 year as a prerequisite. There's a very common misconception as to whether after working on a 482 for 1 year, can I apply for permanent residence? No. So that 1 year requirement is the prerequisite for the TSS, not for the 186 stream, TRT stream. Very common misconception. And another change that the department has promised that there's going to be a public register of approved sponsor. So you can perhaps pretty much look at physiotherapist organizations in Australia and see who can actually sponsor you. I think that's going to be really helpful for a lot of my clients and everyone else. So keep an eye on that when it comes through. Probably it will come through sometime this year as well. Currently, there are accredited sponsors published, but they're only the ones who are using the program heavily. I doubt that physiotherapy organizations, apart from hospitals, I don't think there would be many accredited companies because of the structure and the type of work that it involves. All right, and then there's the 186 TRT stream, where the current requirement is that you have to have worked for the nominated employer for 2 years. Which is going to change, and it will allow people to work on multiple employers. It will still require employer support to apply for permanent residence, but you can count the time that you worked for a previous employer and to be used it for the TRT stream. And there's some flexibility in terms of if you have to leave your employer, there's an 8, 6, or 7 condition which limits you. Previously used to limit to find an employer within 60 days. Now it's 6 months. So you can pretty much work for anyone, but you have to find an employer within 6 months. As to how that 2 year will be calculated going forward, that's what we don't know yet. Obviously, the legislation will confirm. Just being mindful of time, I think I'll move to the next slides. All right, skills assessment, overview of the requirements. When you can jump in if there's anything I provide any conflict information from the registration requirements. I've tried to get my head around it in terms of the changes that have happened this week, and have also discussed with some of the industry experts in the health sector. So there's going to be an English language proficiency requirement, which is the same as the EPRA registration requirement. I looked up the EPRA and found that it's pretty much proficient English requirement. which is 70 in IELTS and 65 in PT. And I think there's a couple of other exams as well, apart from Cambridge, which are generally eligible for visas as well. And then obviously you have to have one of these 6 different registration or requirements. The easiest one is holding a physiotherapy qualification completed in Australia from a program that is registered by the Physiotherapy Board. That's a pretty straightforward one. Before jumping into the second one, I want to look at the New Zealand option, which is obviously what has impacted a lot of people. So for New Zealand pathway, people need to hold a current and unconditional annual practicing certificate issued by the Physiotherapy Board of New Zealand and 2 years of work as a physiotherapist in New Zealand. So it can't be anywhere else, not even Australia. A lot of people are asking questions whether their experience in Australia can be counted. No, it can only be where it's completed in New Zealand, and they need to have that registration certificate with no conditions. So I think it's a general registration, right, man, that New Zealand also gives. And the other part is obviously is that if you've completed your qualification, physiotherapy qualification in New Zealand, according to the requirements that are outlined here, then you can potentially still apply for a skills assessment. And then there's this third option, which I wasn't 100% sure, is that they need, if someone who is holding an Australian Physiotherapy Council certificate of substantial equivalence. My understanding is there's only a few institutions around the world that are on that list. I was trying to look it up. Apparently, it's supposed to be somewhere on the APC website, but I couldn't find it.
I can talk about it if you want to really quick.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So, till 2019, the APC had another pathway. It was called the equivalency pathway. So basically that said that, let's say back in the day, in 2017, I applied, my university said, here you go, take all this documentation. I can prove that our university's education is same at par with Australia. So you're pretty much taking a big chance. So you give them all the documentation, every single transcript, every single, in university, 6 years, you've taken all these courses, you've given them every single thing. They will take their time and analyze every paperwork and then come back and say yes or no, your education is substantially equivalent to the Australian education system here for physiotherapy. And then what they would do, so let's say for me, for example, just as an example, that let's say my university was from 2007 to 2012, right? So they would put that year onto their website. So if you go onto APC's website, you can see substantial equivalent programs. So let's say XYZ University in the US is there on the list. But now let's say Hussein was my colleague and he was actually a batch younger, right? Or batch older, whichever one. And instead of 2007 to 2012, he was 2008 to 2014, they would not take it. So you had to be, and so if Hussein wanted to go through that pathway, he would have to go through the entire process again. Now, as of 2019, they said that we're not going to look at any new programs, any new cohorts. And as of last year, I would say that, or no, as of early this year, they said no more substantial equivalence pathway because that's a lot of paperwork on them and they don't like paperwork.
So perhaps not many people would be eligible, right?
Not anymore, unless there's somebody who's already on the list. Or they're holding on to the certificate and now let's say their visa status has changed, something has changed within it, and now they want to go through skilled migration. They already have that certificate from the APC, they can go through that. Otherwise, your only option is either work in New Zealand unconditionally or go through the APC standard assessment pathway if you're going through the skilled migration route.
All right, makes sense. Thanks for the insights, man. So the last option, obviously, which is the main standard pathway, is that you need to hold an Australian Physiotherapy Council final certificate in order to be eligible for a skill assessment. What my understanding is that it doesn't necessarily require a general registration for the skill assessment. They would still consider as long as you have the final certificate. And obviously, it's final certificate as when covered through there's 3 steps to it, which is including paper assessment, written examination, clinical examination. And I think once you've done a paper assessment and that training course that you were talking about, when you get an interim certificate, and on the basis of interim certificate, you can potentially get a limited registration, right?
Yes.
I'll talk about in the next slide why I'm referring to that. And obviously, if you complete the written examination and the clinical examination, a written examination, I think, can still be done online, correct, man? But the clinical examination, that's where the problem happens for a lot of medical professionals. They have been applying for visitor visas, and a lot of them have been refused. From what I understand from my clients, and the reason obviously is that they refuse it on the basis of genuine temporary entrant criteria. So consider that if you can list other reasons for visiting. If you have, obviously, I wouldn't say that don't lie. I would say don't lie, but obviously maybe you have some relevance that you can visit in Australia. Maybe perhaps rely on that more so as compared to listing it, this being the primary reason, because the refusal rate for visitor visas, because of all the changes that have happened and housing crisis that we have in Australia, the refusal rate for standard visitor visa is about 50% from certain countries, including subcontinent, specifically India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. Mostly other countries, even from there, 30 to 50%. Sorry, from Pakistan and these countries, up to 50 to 70% refusal rate over the last 4 months. We were expecting that this was go away because the students that were jumping on from visitor to student has been closed as of 1 July 2024. But unfortunately, the department still hasn't lifted their foot from the brake. And they're still refusing a lot of applications. I'm still seeing. So every time I get a visitor visa, I'm as excited as someone getting a permanent residence, which is why not a visitor visa is not my favorite, but I still do for my clients where there's a very strong case and I can assist them. This obviously also goes against my record as well. If there's a refusal. So that's one thing that you need to consider. So which is why, if you can, I'll talk about in the next slide more in terms of registration types, in terms of what could be your potential options if you are unable to travel for a clinical examination. Perhaps you can come if you have a partner, consider the options for them. That's what I advise to doctors as well. Consider these options for them, and you can potentially come as a partner, or consider getting an employer sponsorship with a limited registration, because that's what I require, which I'll talk about shortly. Obviously, it's not very easy. It's challenging, not just for physiotherapists, but across the board. But I would say physiotherapists still stand a better chance as compared to an accountant sitting in somewhere else and applying for an employer sponsor visa. It's very difficult to get because employer doesn't have that level of relationship with you. And obviously the skills that you have overseas are not all transferable in Australia. I'm not saying that they are not absolutely, but a lot of employers are hesitant, and sometimes they don't know the criteria and what's involved in employer sponsorship, which is why. But it's always good if you find an employer and they are considering you, feel free to reach out to us. Obviously, we can educate them in terms of what's involved, the sponsorship obligations are, because that's what the number one factor that they're scared about. What is it going to involve? Obviously, we're there to help them with the documentation and everything. So if you find an employer, reach out to us, start the process. I'm happy to assist them, go through their company requirements and visa requirements with you. And so going back to the skill assessment, so processing time is the same, I think, as it used to be before. Hopefully, it probably will improve now because of the restricted processing or restricted eligibility requirements that we have is about 10 to 12 weeks, and skill assessment fee I don't think has changed since previously of 1674. All right, next slide. So a little bit more about what is required. The number one question is, what's the visa options I have if I hold a registration, if I have a skill assessment, what are my options? So to narrow it down, I've tried to make it pretty clear in terms of your options. For general skill migration visa, which I spoke about, 189, 491, 190, you need to have a skill assessment. If you don't have a skill assessment, GSM is not an option for you. Even if you are being considered as a partner of someone, you can't claim skills points for skilled partner unless you have a skill assessment. So do consider that. In terms of 482, it's pretty lenient. Any type of registration is okay, even if you have limited registration, which is why I said that do get registration if you can, and do consider options, because I know a lot of people who are overseas who have secured jobs, in Australia, but obviously it's best to research on the employer, especially if you're sitting overseas. But the last thing you want is getting stuck with employer who is going to exploit you. So look for the red flags, which I'll talk about at the end. But it's I hear a lot of stories from across the country, and I feel really bad for people who are stuck on the 482. So don't when an employer offers you a position, don't jump the gun and get excited, and look for the red flags. And I'll talk about what sort of red flags that you can look at before doing that. For the registration for the 186, if it's a direct entry stream, you need both a registration of any level and a skill assessment. Obviously, now it's not going to be possible without the skill assessment. You may not get without meeting one of those requirements. And if you do, then obviously you can also get registration in most cases now. So you need to have both in order to apply for a direct entry 186. Same goes for the 494. You need to have a registration and skill assessment in order to apply for a 494. Next slide. So just like I was saying, beware of the migration fraud. Unfortunately, the agents that are not in Australia and not registered with the OMARA, which is our Migration Agents Registration Authority, they can still submit applications on behalf of applicants. There has been a lot of advocacy from immigration lawyers and migration agents. We're trying to get the department to put some policy in place because it's leading to a lot of issues in terms of migration fraud and people falling for the traps, paying money, and in the end, the agent just gets away with it or make mistakes. And another reason obviously is that not every agent has I have studied 1 year diploma, immigration lawyer study law. They know what the laws are around the structure of requirements and everything. They don't have access to our immigration dictionary or legislations policies that we have. Every person's circumstances are different. So I would say if you can afford, do hire a registered agent or an immigration lawyer. There are some in Australia. There are some overseas as well in some countries like UK, India, Pakistan as well. So if you can find one, please do only consider having services from them. So even if they're overseas, they're still bound to comply with the requirements. And beware of unrealistic promises. Like the most I hear people saying that they're asking for $30,000 or $50,000, and they're promising that we'll get you a job in Australia. This is a clear red flag. Don't pay, even if it's a genuine person who actually will arrange that for you. It's very risky because a lot of agents who are involved in this scam are under the radar of the department, and the department does not let it go. If someone gets caught doing this, then it's a lead that leads to a lot of problems for applicants, for sponsor, for agents. Don't fall for it. Look for a genuine employer. You can consider going through a recruiter. I think recruiter does help in finding a job, but make sure that recruiter is not asking you money to secure a job because they generally get paid by the employer. So look out for those red flags. If they're asking money, it's a scam. Don't go for it. And also try obviously avoiding cash payments. Try to keep it online. I know it's not easy in every country, but it's probably a safer way of doing a transaction. And read all the documents. Like agents should be providing you a cost agreement. Look for the terms and conditions. One of my lecturer who used to teach us law, he used to say that I used to sleep with my cost agreement and so don't jump the gun, sign the agreement but just because you trust someone. Make sure that you read terms and conditions if you can, or get someone who can understand legal terms. All right, so how we can help. Obviously, I'm a registered migration agent, been in the industry for 10 years. We obviously provide tailored consultation for different types of visas and different industries, especially physiotherapists and medical professionals, which is my new favorite. And we obviously provide end-to-end visa services with your visa application, skill assessment, document preparation. So for anything, please feel free to reach out to me. Here's my QR code for LinkedIn. Do follow me on Facebook. I haven't started publishing my social media account is not that active yet, but my website is under development, and I'm hoping that I'm going to start picking up on this and getting them to do the work, because I don't have time much at this stage in terms of the work that I have. But do keep an eye. I'm planning on starting active involvement on social media from December, start of December. All right. Now, happy to take on questions.
Okay.
Like,
What we might do, I'll just go through, otherwise you'll be
sure.
scrolling up and down. So
Yeah.
first we have, I'm 41 years old, and is there any option to get PR without skills assessment, because the age limit threshold is 45 years? So please let us know any options for PR.
So for someone who is a 41-year-old, potentially an option could be get an employer on a 482 visa. And you can still meet the requirements through the temporary residence transition stream, as long as the TRT stream application is lodged before 2 years. You can even apply for a direct entry stream down the track, as long as you secure a skill assessment after coming to Australia, if you're outside Australia, and get your general registration after the exams and everything. Then you can still consider applying for a direct entry. So that could be an option. There's still an exemption if you reach 45, but the threshold is fair work high income threshold, which is currently 175,000, probably very unrealistic for most occupations to meet that age exemption.
Can we apply for a 189 after the written assessment? I'm currently on a 485 visa.
So for general skill migration, you need a registration. So once you have that final certificate, you can apply for skill assessment, and then, sorry, not registration, skill assessment. So general skill migration, you need to have that. As long as you're eligible for skill assessment and you have 3 years of relevant experience, you can apply for, sorry, as long as you have the skill assessment, you can apply for a GSM visa.
For 186 TRT, employer-sponsored visa, do we need to require positive skills assessment?
No, not for TRT. So all you need is some sort of registration, which is what you require for 482. And under TRT stream, the benefit of that is that you don't need a skill assessment for 186 TRT.
Perfect. I have an 190 visa grant, so is it possible to start to work on limited registration after finishing my written assessment? I'm currently in India, planning to shift in March, but my concern is that I should get a job on limited registration.
I think that's probably more for you, Van, because obviously if you're a permanent resident, you don't need meet any additional visa requirements.
Oh, and with the visa requirements, since there's going to have unlimited work rights, you can again apply for limited registration while you prep for the clinicals. Or again, like I said, don't just limit yourself to that. Work as an AHA. I'll give you an example, right? Right now, I'm working with a clinician. He's actually from Melbourne. He came here on a 190 visa grant, which was great, but couldn't find limited registration. He's actually a cardio NICU, like within the neonatal intensive unit, physio back in his home country in South America. Couldn't find anything comparable, no jobs available. And started, obviously, he had to survive. And, we all survived coming to a brand new country. Started working with a builder with labor jobs, and now he has a builder's license. So believe it or not, he's now, after 5 years of being in Australia, is going through the pathway. And his plan, because I asked, I was like, what's your plan? And he's like, 3 days builder, 2 days physio. And he's like, I want to enjoy both worlds. And again, what I like to say, maybe I'm too optimistic, do not limit your options. I know people that could not find a job as a physio. They did babysitting. They did other positions, just because, again, you have to survive in a country. So do keep your options open. I hope you find jobs as a physio, but again, recognize just blankly emailing companies is not going to be helpful. You need to have a good tailored resume, tailored cover letter. You need to present yourself in a certain way. Have a LinkedIn page, make sure your Facebook, because employers look at Facebook. I'm an employer and I look at people's Facebook and social media and see what they're doing, just because you need to know who you're hiring. That's just the world that we live in. So you have to have that background done. But again, apply, keep your options open as an AHA, keep your options open for other jobs, but get the process going to get that general registration. Your goal should be general registration over anything.
One thing I would add here is 190, even though it's a permanent residence application, the number one question that I get asked, that if I were nominated by, for example, Queensland, can I move to another state? You can potentially, but I highly recommend people to write to your state body and get their approval so you don't get in problem. Although I've never seen a case where people would be in trouble at the time of citizenship or any other point. But the last thing you want is state taking any action. So it's always best to be safe and reach out to them and just tell them honestly that you have found a role that you couldn't find a job in the nominating state, and they're generally fine. That's what I've heard from most of my clients.
Yeah. Does 482 for physios require skills assessment? We've talked about it, that it does not. I applied for skills assessment on 2nd of October, but application got cancelled like others this week. What should be my best way to get a sponsored job in Australia now on the basis of general APRA registration? Is it possible now?
So for 482, obviously you need just, if you have a general registration, then you don't need to have a skill assessment. So you can potentially apply for jobs in Australia and have a 482 applied for.
Yeah. Can one be exempted for skills assessment for PR application since worked for the same employer for more than 2 years?
Yes, under the TRT stream, you don't need to have a skill assessment. As long as you have the registration requirements, you can apply for the PR under TRT stream.
Currently, I'm onshore with APC interim certificate on a visa with all work rights. What are my options? Should I go for the written and the clinical exam, or HCPC pathway would work fine?
I don't understand. I didn't get it. What was the visa?
So currently it just says on a visa with all work rights. I think it depends on the type of visa and
Yeah.
pathway is, because if your pathway is taking you to skilled migration, then you would need to go through APC. And if it's not, and if it's for a two-way or another way to PR, then I would say don't go to the loophole as long as you can get through. It's kind of one of those things. If you've seen Stranger Things, if you can get through that hole, get through. Be done with it. That's what I would say. Can we do skills assessment right after achieving the final certificate, or do we need to gain relevant work experience for skills assessment? No, it's right after. Once you get the final. Yeah, I think, can you explain what you mean by unconditional annual practice certificate and experience no conditions from New Zealand?
Obviously, I'm not an expert on the New Zealand registration, but what I understand is there's general and there's limited, and sometimes conditions are imposed on health practitioners. So it needs to be a no condition general certificate. That is my understanding of it.
Yeah. Can we get a sponsorship for allied health assistant? Are you there? So no. Can we go for 482 visa if registered with APRA through New Zealand board registration?
Yeah. If you hold a registration, you can, even if it's limited or general, you can still apply for 482.
I'm a 24-year-old and hold an interim certificate. Will apply for limited registration soon after meeting English proficiency. Which visa would be the best in case if I find a job?
482 would be the best option for you in that case, because that is the one which allows you to apply for an employer sponsorship, not a direct entry or general skilled migration. Sorry, my battery is about to die, so I have to plug in. Yeah.
I'm a physiotherapist from the Philippines working as a limited registration physio under 482 visa with a 4-year contract signed in a regional area clinic. What are my options to PR pathway?
I would say if you have several options in terms of TRT pathway down the track with 2 years without having to have a general registration. But if you do happen to get general registration and you meet the skill assessment requirement, you can still potentially consider a 186 or a 494 regional sponsored visas, meeting obviously all the other requirements for the skill assessment.
If I want to work under supervision to prepare for the clinical assessment of the APC, which means limited registration, which visa should I get for that?
Yeah, the same as the 482 is probably your best shot.
With the interim certificate and limited registration, if we get 2 years experience from the sponsor and PR, is limited registration and PR enough in the long run, or we need general registration for living in Australia as a physio? I would say you would need that general registration because, again, it depends. This is just me talking from being a general registration physio, that having that autonomy of practice and being able to go into other streams, you would need a general registration. Plus the demand for general registration is more than
So
just.
is it similar to like in our industry where someone is like a law graduate, they can't advise independently? Is it similar to,
Yeah, they need a supervisor. So again, you are under someone.
hmm,
And again, think about it this way, right? One, limited registration physios are paid at a lower rate than what a general registration physio would be paid at, because somehow the companies are going to benefit, not benefit, they have to match up to what they're paying, because again, remember what I said, they're losing on 20 clients for that week because they're getting that supervisor. So I wouldn't recommend just being in Australia and being on limited registration if you can get general registration. That would be my recommendation. So what I understand is through HCPC New Zealand pathway, you can still get the registration in Australia as a physio, but you will not be eligible for APC skill assessment in totality. Yes. Um, HCPC TTMR pathway, you can still get a general registration, but unable to use it for PR unless with 2 years experience in New Zealand.
yeah. So if obviously you have gone through that path when you have 2 years of experience in New Zealand, you can still potentially qualify for a skill assessment
Yeah.
and explore GSM options as well.
Yes. Do we first need to find an employer who is willing to give sponsorship or go to a migration lawyer like you? Will you help connect with employers? What will be your charges for 482?
So my part comes after the employer has done the recruitment process. I would say if you don't know an employer directly, go through a recruitment consultant based in Australia. I'm hoping that they are all regulated as well, just like every other profession is. And look out for the red flags. And once you have secured the job, you can reach out to us. I'm happy to chat to your employer. And I generally quote the fee to the employer because this employer has to pay a certain level of fee. So it's always best to get them on board, and I confirm with them first the arrangements, and I'm obviously happy to discuss that with you after. But I'm happy to have initial chat with you to discuss your employer, what do you know about them, and if they're open to a migration lawyer or migration agent to discuss with them with their consent.
Yeah, perfect. I'm already in Australia, just started my limited registration physio. Can I apply for PR with this?
Not directly. 482 is possibly the option leading to TRT, unless you do go through the process and get the skills assessment to meet other options like GSM or direct entry employer sponsored or 494.
Okay. So if I'm overseas and have an interim certificate, can I fly to Australia under 482 visa? Then when I find an employer and a job without starting limited registration, may I apply for limited registration while working in Australia? So for limited registration, you need a supervisor. So that's step one. So you need a job for limited
Yeah,
registration.
and without job, you have to have an employer sponsor visa 482 secured first through an employer sponsorship before you can come to Australia. 482 cannot be granted directly to independents, unfortunately.
So the way that it will work, let's say I was overseas, I have to first find an employer that will agree to sponsor me.
Yeah.
Then we get that process started. So it's two things going side by side. One is the APRA side with limited registration while I complete the pathway in the background, and then the visa side that's happening.
Yeah. So what
Uh,
I would ask you, obviously, at the time when you come to me is whether you have a limited registration certificate, which is what we require for the 482. Obviously, you can do that. I don't know how long does that take, when?
It can be anywhere from 1 month. So APRA, the board meets. So let's say physiotherapy board, they meet once a month. So it's usually middle of the month. They don't disclose the date. They're very hush hush about that. But usually it's the second week of the month. And so it can be anywhere from 6 weeks to 3 months, because every time they meet, they'll look at your documents and say, oh, we need this, we need that. So that it can extend up to it.
However, you can do that simultaneously because obviously there's a lot of employer requirements and they have to advertise the role and meet other requirements. Paperwork generally, from my experience, takes about 6 to 8 weeks anyway. So you
Yes.
can do all of this sideways. You don't have to do one to start the next process.
100%. Are we allowed to take the written assessment overseas before starting my job with an employer under the interim certificate practice? Yes, absolutely. And that's something that I recommend. Like, we're talking to do things side by side. Don't just sit there waiting to get limited registration. If you are going to the standard assessment pathway, start working through the written assessment, clinical exam prep, so that you're already setting yourself up. Because as soon as, let's say, you get a job, boom, you can start planning the next step. So a lot of clinicians actually waste a lot of time just sitting in the background, just waiting to get a job. But if you know that this is the path you're going, you have to kind of take that chance on yourself, give the written, and start the process in the background.
That is that an online system, or do you have to kind of attend one of the overseas centers, just like for some of the
So, so with the written assessment, the exam is only center-based, is only Melbourne and Sydney. Pre-COVID, it used to be in different parts of the world, but now it's just Melbourne and Sydney. Everywhere else is a remote exam. So it's a proctored remote exam. Can I get PR with general registration, but without positive skills assessment under 186 visa? Also, what is the criteria an organization has to meet to sponsor an employee?
So in terms of holding, you can still apply for a 482 leading to PR with the general registration, but obviously if you're doing a direct entry or a 494, you need a skills assessment as well. In terms of what an employer needs to go through, obviously the things that we generally consider is how strong financially the business is in order to apply for a sponsorship in first place. Secondly, do they have the financial capacity to hire an overseas worker and pay them according to the market rates and meet the minimum salary 7315 threshold, advertise the role for 28 days, and that's pretty much it from employer side. I think from applicant side, it revolves around qualification, experience, English, health, and character being the main requirements.
Yeah. If I go on limited registration on the 482 visa and then apply to New Zealand to APRA, would that be possible? Yeah.
You can still apply, I think, for overseas, but there's, in terms of study, there's limits on the 482 visa. From what I remember, I think there's a 90-day study limit if you were to study anything. But obviously, it's a New Zealand registration requirement, which I'm not an expert.
Yeah. Interim certificate will be expiring on July 2025, but already started processing HCPC New Zealand pathway, which takes approximately 7 to 9 months. Is it advisable to book the written exam and just sit to justify that I'm taking the steps toward general registration for my certificate to be renewed? You might have to. Again, it goes back to you now in this situation. It comes back to what is your visa. If you need to have any kind of skilled assessment done through APC, then you need that standard assessment. If you don't need it, then either you wait for HCPC or you do that. But I would recommend in this situation, if HCPC is going to take longer, depending on when you apply, then absolutely sit for the written assessment because they need you to be active within the active within the pathway. And we're going to take 2 more questions and then anything else, please email. Otherwise, we'll be here all night. Can, like other medical professions in the future with APRA, general registration, can we apply for general skilled migration like 189 and 190?
Like other professions? I mean, health, when it comes to health practitioners, it's quite complex. There's layers of onion, we call it, and it varies from occupation to occupation. I can make a general comment in terms of medical professionals. They don't have a skill assessment generally, and they can apply through a registration. I don't want to confuse people here with physiotherapists, but it's a very fairly complex area. There's layers of we need to have a closer look at individual situation for someone.
Yeah. I'm on 485 visa and working under limited registration since the last 1 year. Can I ask my employer to sponsor me on a 186 after working more than a year? Is it compulsory to work on 482 visa to get my 186, or my work experience in my temporary residency also counts?
So in terms of his options, I think 482 is the best option because with limited registration, you can't apply for permanent residence straight away. And secondly, the time that you can count towards meeting the 186 TRT has to be on the 482. So any experience before might help employer to get exemption for labor market testing, but it wouldn't allow you to apply for permanent residence to count that time. Unfortunately, you have to have worked on that employer sponsored 482 visa for 2 years. So if let's say you are already working, so the time would start from the grant of 482 from that day onwards.
Perfect. Last one, lucky one. How many years of experience is needed for the PR application?
So it depends. If you're referring to TRT, then all you need is 2 years on a 482 visa. If you're referring to a 186 direct entry or a 494, you need 3 years of overall experience. It doesn't have to be with the same employer. It can be overall anywhere in the world, as long as it's within the nominated relevant role. Then you can potentially have more options to apply for permanent residence, subject to meeting skill assessment as well.
Perfect. All right. Any other questions, please, guys, email us and I will forward them through to Mr. Hussain, and then he will be very busy answering all these questions. Like I said, otherwise we'll be here all night answering questions. But from my end, thank you so much for everyone participating. I know there's a lot that's going on in this week, but you do realize that when this big tide happens, it is going to settle down. Think that was the reason behind having this impromptu webinar, just casual, just let's sit down and chat, so that it gives you guys some clarity, because I know with everyone receiving the denial on their applications for HCPC, for the other side, just not knowing what pathways you have, hopefully there's some clarity. I would, from my end, recommend obviously contacting Mr. Hussain directly, because it is case by case. Like there's so many, like Mr. Hussain said, like so many layers of the onion, and that's where immigration just whoosh, there's so much going on. And rather than just saying this is who I am, a lot needs to be looked at. So definitely contact him. He's your expert. Anything standard assessment related, written and clinical, come talk to me, come have a chat with me. I am going to send the handouts so that you have access to it. I will again post Mr. Hussain's information on our webpage and through the email, so you have access to that too. But from my end, thank you so much for everyone participating, and have a good Friday. On to you.
Thank you, Van, for having me, and it was a pleasure to be part of this. I think hopefully it was helpful for a lot of people. And if you need to reach out, feel free to reach out, myself or Van.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. Good night. Bye-bye.